No maid lasted with the black millionaire's little daughter, until a new maid did the impossible. The rain fell in cold, unforgiving sheets, plastering Alara's thin cardigan to her skin and soaking through the worn soles of her shoes. Beside her, her 5-year-old son, Leo, shivered, his small hand clutching hers with a desperate strength that broke her heart. They stood under the failing awning of a closed bakery, the sweet smell of yesterday's bread a cruel mockery of the gnawing hunger in their bellies. Every shelter was full, every door had been closed to them, and the last of their money was a crumpled $5 bill in her pocket, saved for a warm drink they couldn't afford if they also wanted a bus ticket to somewhere, anywhere, else. Leo looked up, his face pale in the sickly yellow glow of a street lamp, his teeth chattering. "Mommy, I'm so cold. How could this be their life? How could a world so full of glittering skyscrapers and endless wealth have no room for a woman and her small child who had done nothing wrong but fall on hard times? Was this the end of the line? A desolate street corner where hope finally drowned in a puddle of muddy rainwater? This was the moment of absolute despair, the precipice over which Alara feared she would finally fall. She had been a good person her entire life. She worked hard. She was honest to a fault. She loved her son with a ferocity that was the only fire she had left. But none of it mattered. Integrity didn't pay rent. Kindness didn't buy food. She pulled Leo closer, trying to shield him with her own body, a futile gesture against the biting wind. Her gaze fell to the pavement, and that's when she saw it. A dark leather rectangle, half hidden by a slick of wet leaves. A wallet. Her first instinct was a jolt of pure, animalistic hope. Money, food, a motel room for the night. Her hand trembled as she reached for it, her fingers closing around the cold, damp leather. It was heavy, substantial. She flipped it open, her breath catching in her throat. It was stuffed with $100 bills, more money than she had seen in her entire life. Behind the cash there was a driver's license. Julian Vance. The address was on a street name she recognized, one of the wealthiest enclaves in the city, a place of myth and legend for people like her. And tucked beside the license was a small, worn photograph of a little girl with enormous, sad eyes and a crown of beautiful braids, a girl who looked to be about Leo's age. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was a test. The universe was presenting her with a choice. She could take the money, who would ever know? This Julian Vance was clearly a man who would barely miss it, could save them, could give Leo a warm bed, a full stomach. It was a lifeline thrown into the storm that was their life. She looked from the face of the sad little girl in the photo to the trusting face of her own son, whose world had been reduced to this cold, wet sidewalk. The temptation was a physical thing, a weight in her chest that made it hard to breathe. But then she thought about the man who lost this. She thought about him getting home, reaching for his wallet, the panic that would follow. She thought about the little girl, and what kind of a world she was building for her own son if their salvation was built on someone else's loss. The conflict raged within her for a moment that stretched into an eternity. Then, with a clarity that felt like a beam of sunlight piercing the storm clouds, she knew what she had to do. She closed the wallet, tucked it securely into her pocket, and took out her crumpled $5 bill. "Come on, sweetie," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "We're going to take a bus ride." It was a choice that made no sense, an act of impossible honesty in the face of utter desperation. But it was the only choice she could live with. The bus ride was a blur of steamy windows and the rhythmic squeak of the wipers. Alara held the wallet in her lap like a fragile bird, protecting it from the jostle of the city streets. Leo, exhausted and finally warm, had fallen asleep with his head on her shoulder. The address on the license led them to a part of the city that felt like another planet. The buildings weren't just tall. They were architectural marvels of glass and steel that clawed at the night sky. The Vance Tower was the most imposing of them all, a monolith of dark glass with a lobby that looked more like a modern art museum than an entrance. Alara's reflection in the polished marble floor showed a woman who did not belong here, drenched, disheveled, with a sleeping child in her arms and a lost wallet that felt heavier with every step. A security guard, A man with a stern face and an immaculate uniform stepped forward to intercept her before she even reached the concierge desk. "Can I help you, ma'am?" His tone was polite but firm, the kind of tone used to redirect stray animals. Alara's courage faltered. I'm here for Mr. Julian Vance. I found his wallet." The guard's expression didn't change. "Mr. Vance is not expecting visitors. You can leave the item here, and we will ensure it gets to him." She clutched the wallet tighter. She hadn't come all this way, spent her last dollar to just hand it over. She needed to see this through. "I'd prefer to give it to him personally if that's possible. To make sure he gets it." The guard was about to refuse when a voice cut through the cavernous lobby, sharp and authoritative. "What's going on here, Thomas?" A man emerged from a private elevator, his presence immediately commanding the space. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a dark suit that probably cost more than Alara had earned in the last year. It was the man from the license photo, Julian Vance. His face was handsome but etched with a deep, weary tension, as if he carried the weight of the entire building on his shoulders. His eyes, a piercing shade of charcoal gray, swept over Alara and her sleeping son, his gaze lingering for a moment on their soaked clothes and worn-out shoes. The guard stiffened. "Sir, this woman claims to have found your wallet." Julian's hand went instinctively to his back pocket, his expression shifting from irritation to surprise. He hadn't even realized it was gone. He looked at Alara again, a flicker of suspicion in his eyes. He was used to people wanting things from him, orchestrating encounters, feigning accidents. "You found it." Alara nodded, stepping forward and holding it out. "It was on the street, near a bakery downtown. I wanted to make sure you got it back. Everything should be in there." He took the wallet, his fingers brushing hers for a fleeting second. He opened it, his eyes scanning the contents. The cash, the cards, the picture of his daughter, Lily. It was all there. He looked up at Alara, truly seeing her for the first time. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, but also a quiet dignity. He saw the way she instinctively tightened her arm around her son. She wasn't looking at him with greed or expectation. She was just looking at him. "Thank you," he said, his voice softer now. I must have dropped it getting out of my car. I'd like to give you a reward for your honesty." He reached into the wallet he had just gotten back, pulling out a thick wad of the $100 bills. "Please take this. For your trouble," he held the money out to her, a sum that would change her world, at least for a few weeks. It was the solution to every one of her immediate problems. A warm room, new shoes for Leo, a pantry full of food. But Alara shook her head, a small, resolute movement. "No, thank you, sir. I didn't return it for a reward. I returned it because it was the right thing to do." She felt Leo stir in her arms and gently shushed him back to sleep. "I just need to go now." She turned to leave, her mission accomplished, her impossible choice honored. Julian was stunned into silence. In his world, nothing was free. Every action had a motive, usually financial. This woman, who clearly had nothing, had just refused a small fortune without a moment's hesitation. It was illogical. It was remarkable. "Wait," he called out, his voice echoing in the marble hall. She stopped, her back to him. "At least let me call you a car." It's pouring outside. "Where are you headed?" Alara hesitated. Where were they headed? To another street corner? To wander until dawn? The lie came to her lips easily, a flimsy shield of pride. "We're fine. We're just heading to a friend's place nearby." He knew she was lying. He could see it in the slump of her shoulders, the way she wouldn't turn to face him. He saw the thin folder of papers peeking out of her worn tote bag. A resume. He took a step closer. "You're looking for work." She finally turned, her eyes guarded. Yes. An idea, sudden and impulsive, formed in his mind. It was a long shot, a desperate move born from months of frustration. His daughter, Lily. Since the accident, she had been locked in a world of silence. Nanny after nanny, maid after maid, had quit, unable to handle the oppressive quiet of the penthouse, unable to connect with the little girl who refused to speak, who only communicated through angry scribbles in her sketchbook. He looked at Alara, at the gentle way she held her own child, at the unwavering integrity she had just displayed. Maybe what Lily needed wasn't a professional. Maybe she needed a person. Kind, honest person. "I have a proposition for you," Julian said, his voice low and serious. "I need someone to work in my home. A housekeeper, but more importantly, a companion for my daughter. It's a live-in position. Room and board included." Alara stared at him, bewildered. From a lost wallet to a job offer in the span of 5 minutes? Felt like a dream. "Your daughter." Julian's face tightened, the professional mask slipping to reveal a father's pain. This was the part where everyone else had eventually failed. "My daughter, Lily. She's 6. She doesn't speak." He let the words hang in the air. A heavy, painful truth. "Not since her mother passed away 2 years ago. The job is simple on paper. Keep the house in order, prepare some meals. But the real challenge is Lily. Most people can't handle the silence." He looked at her directly, his gaze intense. "I'm not looking for a miracle worker. I'm just looking for someone who won't give up. Someone kind. Someone patient." He had seen more kindness and integrity in her in the last 10 minutes than he'd seen in his boardroom in 10 years. For Alara, this was more than a lifeline. It was a safe harbor. A room for Leo. A chance to get back on their feet. But she was also terrified. A silent, grieving child? A billionaire's sterile penthouse? It was a world away from anything she had ever known. She looked down at Leo's sleeping face, his peaceful expression a stark contrast to the storm raging inside her. For him, she would do anything. She would face any silence, any challenge. She lifted her chin, her gaze meeting Julian's. "I can be patient," she said softly. "I can be kind." The penthouse was less a home and more a monument to wealth and sorrow. It occupied the top 2 floors of the Vance Tower, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking, godlike view of the city. But inside, everything was cold. White marble floors, gray minimalist furniture, chrome accents that gleamed under recessed lighting. There were no photographs on the walls, no clutter on the tables, no sign that a child actually lived there, save for a small, solitary art easel set up in a corner of the vast living room. The silence was the most oppressive feature of all. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of unspoken grief. Lily was just as her father had described her. A beautiful little girl with her mother's eyes and her father's serious expression. She sat at her easel, her back to the room, completely absorbed in her drawing. She didn't acknowledge their arrival. She didn't look up when Julian knelt beside her and softly introduced them. "Lily, this is Alara, and her son, Leo. They're going to be staying with us for a while." Lily's crayon didn't stop moving. Leo, usually bubbly and outgoing, seemed to shrink in the cavernous room, pressing himself against Alara's leg. Alara's heart ached for the little girl. She could feel the wall Lily had built around herself, brick by invisible brick. She knew she couldn't force her way in. She would have to wait patiently for an invitation. The first few days were a study in quiet observation. Alara moved through the penthouse with a gentle efficiency, cleaning surfaces that were already spotless, organizing closets that were already perfectly arranged. She learned the geography of Julian's life, the long hours he spent at the office, the late nights he worked in his home study, the way he would stand by Lily's bedroom door for long minutes before heading to his own, his face a mask of helpless love. He was a man adrift, anchored only by his work and his grief. Alara's primary focus was Lily. She didn't try to force conversation. Instead, she narrated her own actions in a soft, soothing voice. "I'm just going to tidy up the kitchen now, sweetie. I think I'll make some soup for lunch." "It's a good day for soup," she spoke to Lily as if she expected a reply, but she never demanded one. She created a space where speech was welcome, but not required. She brought Leo's colorful, well-loved toys into the stark living room, a small island of cheerful chaos in the sea of beige. Leo, with the simple wisdom of a child, understood. He would build towers of blocks near Lily's easel, chattering away to himself. This is the big castle for the dragon. Roar. Lily would pretend not to notice, but Alara saw the subtle shift in her posture, the way her head would tilt ever so slightly in Leo's direction. The drawings were the only window into Lily's world. They were always the same, rendered with a chilling, repetitive precision. A black car, shattered and broken. A tall, slender woman with huge, feathery wings, floating above it. A stick figure of a little girl, standing far away, all alone. Alara would look at these drawings when Lily was asleep, her heart constricting with a sorrow so profound it felt like her own. This wasn't just silence. It was a trauma replayed over and over again on paper. One afternoon, Alara was baking. It was something she loved, something that made any space feel like a home. The warm, sweet scent of cinnamon and sugar began to fill the sterile air of the penthouse, a stark contrast to its usual scentless neutrality. She was cutting out cookies with Leo, letting him make a happy mess with the flour. "Look, Mommy, a star!" he chirped, holding up a lopsided shape. From the corner of her eye, Alara saw Lily get up from her easel. The little girl walked slowly, cautiously, toward the kitchen island. She didn't come close, just stood at the edge of the room, her small hands clasped behind her back. Her gaze was fixed on the cookie dough, her nostrils flaring slightly as she took in the warm aroma. It was the most interest she had shown in anything other than her drawings since Alara had arrived. Alara's heart gave a hopeful leap. She kept her voice even, casual. "Leo and I are making cinnamon stars. They were my favorite when I was a little girl. Would you like to make one?" She held out a small piece of dough, a silent offering. Lily stared at the dough, then at Alara's outstretched hand. For a moment, Alara thought she might actually take it. The air was thick with unspoken possibility. But then, as if an invisible string had pulled her back, Lily shook her head once, a tiny, sharp movement. She turned and walked back to her easel, picking up her black crayon. The wall was back up. Alara's shoulders slumped, but only for a second. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't nothing. She had come out from behind the easel. She had smelled the cookies. It was a start. She gave Leo a bright smile. "More for us, then." That evening, Julian came home earlier than usual. He stopped in the doorway of the kitchen, drawn by the same warm scent that had intrigued his daughter. He saw Alara and Leo sitting at the table, decorating the cookies with colored icing. On the counter was a plate with a single, perfectly decorated star cookie set aside. He knew without having to ask who it was for. A strange feeling washed over him, a warmth that had nothing to do with the oven. This was what a home was supposed to smell like. This was what it was supposed to feel like. He walked in, loosening his tie. "Smells good in here." Leo grinned. "We made star cookies. Mommy saved one for Lily, but she didn't want it." Alara shot Leo a gentle, warning look, but the damage was done. Julian's face clouded over. "She never wants anything," he said, the weariness back in his voice. "The doctors, the therapists, they all say to be patient. But how long can you be patient when your own child is a ghost in your house?" "She's not a ghost, Julian," Alara said softly, her voice firm with a conviction that surprised him. "She's a little girl who is hurting very, very badly. She's in there. I see her. She just doesn't know how to get out." He sank into a chair opposite her, rubbing his temples. The facade of the powerful CEO was gone, replaced by a tired, grieving father. Her mother, Clara, she was the sun. She filled every room with light and laughter. When she died, he trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Lily was in the car with her. She saw everything. She walked away without a scratch, physically. But she left her voice on that road. I think she feels guilty. Guilty for surviving. Or maybe she blames me. I should have been there. I was closing a deal in Tokyo. I was on the phone with my board when my world ended. It was the most he had ever shared with anyone. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and painful. Alara's heart went out to him. She saw past the billionaire and saw the man, broken by loss and weighed down by a guilt he didn't deserve. "That's not your fault," she said, her voice filled with an empathy that felt like a balm on his raw nerves. "You couldn't have known. And Lily doesn't blame you. She's just lost. The drawing she makes of the woman with wings, I think that's her mom. She's not gone in Lily's mind. She's an angel watching over her. But she's also far away. And Lily is all alone on the ground. She just needs someone to show her it's safe to come back." Julian looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not an employee, but a woman of incredible strength and wisdom. She understood his daughter's pain in a way none of the expensive specialists ever had. He felt a profound sense of gratitude, and something else, something deeper and more complex, began to stir within him. For the first time in 2 years, a flicker of hope ignited in the cold, desolate landscape of his heart. Maybe, just maybe, this kind, patient woman was the one who could finally show his daughter, and him, that it was safe to come back. The weeks turned into a month, then 2. A quiet, fragile rhythm established itself in the penthouse. Alara's presence was a steady, gentle hum beneath the oppressive silence. She filled the space not with noise, but with life. She bought a fiddle-leaf fig tree for the living room, its green leaves a vibrant shock against the gray walls. She convinced Julian to let her put up some of Leo's joyful, messy paintings on the enormous, sterile refrigerator. Each small change was a quiet act of rebellion against the grief that had held the home captive for so long. The connection between Julian and Alara deepened in the late-night quiet after the children were asleep. They would sit in the kitchen, the glittering city spread out below them like a carpet of fallen stars, and they would talk. He told her about Clara, about their whirlwind romance and the dreams they had shared. She, in turn, told him about her own struggles, about Leo's father who had left when he was just a baby, and her fierce determination to give her son a better life. They were from 2 different worlds, their lives separated by a chasm of wealth and privilege, but in that quiet kitchen, they were just 2 lonely people, finding solace in each other's company. He found himself looking forward to these conversations, to the way her eyes would light up when she talked about Leo, to the calming, empathetic way she listened. The turning point with Lily came on a Tuesday afternoon. Alara was sitting on the floor, helping Leo with a puzzle of a farm scene. She was making the animal noises, much to Leo's delight. "And the cow says moo." A tiny sound came from the other side of the room. It was barely audible, a little squeak. Alara and Leo both froze. They looked over at Lily's easel. She was still facing away from them, but her shoulders were shaking. It was the sound of a suppressed giggle. Alara's heart soared. She shared a wide-eyed look with Leo. He, understanding the delicacy of the moment, simply grinned and went back to the puzzle. Alara continued, her voice trembling just a little. "And the little piggy says, oink, oink, oink." This time, a real giggle escaped, a small, breathy sound like the ringing of a tiny silver bell. It was the most beautiful sound Alara had ever heard. Lily quickly slapped a hand over her mouth, as if shocked at her own betrayal of her silence. But the spell had been broken. A sound had escaped the fortress. That night, after she tucked Lily into bed, Alara found one of the child's drawings left on her pillow. It was different from all the others. It still showed the woman with wings in the sky and the little girl on the ground. But this time, next to the little girl was another figure. A woman with a kind smile and a little boy holding her hand. And above them all, a bright yellow sun was shining. Alara clutched the drawing to her chest, tears streaming down her face. They weren't tears of sorrow, but of overwhelming, triumphant joy. This period of quiet progress, this honeymoon phase of their strange, makeshift family, was a time of healing for them all. Julian started coming home from work earlier, eager to not miss dinner. He would sit on the floor and help with puzzles, his deep voice a surprising contrast as he made sheep noises. He watched Alara with a growing sense of wonder and admiration. She had brought warmth and light back into his home, not by trying to replace Clara, but by simply being herself. He was falling in love with her, a realization that was both terrifying and exhilarating. But the world outside the penthouse walls could not be kept at bay forever. The arrival of Agnes Thorne shattered their fragile peace like a thrown stone through a plate-glass window. She was Clara's mother, a formidable woman swathed in designer clothes and an aura of icy disapproval. She arrived unannounced one afternoon, sweeping into the living room and surveying the small signs of life, the plant, the children's drawings, with a look of utter contempt. "Julian," she said, her voice dripping with condescension as he came to greet her. "What is all this clutter? And who," she added, her sharp eyes landing on Alara, "is this?" Agnes had always blamed Julian for her daughter's death. In her grief-stricken mind, his business trip was an act of abandonment. She had fought him for custody of Lily after the accident and lost, a bitterness she had nurtured ever since. Seeing Alara, a woman who was so clearly becoming important to Julian and her granddaughter, was more than she could bear. She saw her as a replacement, an insult to Clara's memory. Her visit was the beginning of a Cold War. She made cutting remarks to Alara, thinly veiled insults about her clothes, her background, her cooking. "In my day, staff knew their place," she would say, loud enough for everyone to hear. She doted on Lily in a suffocating way, constantly bringing up the past. "Oh, you look so much like your dear mother. It's a tragedy she was taken from us so young. If only your father had been here." Every word was a carefully aimed dart, meant to reopen old wounds. Alara endured it with quiet grace, for Julian's sake and for Lily's. But she could see the effect Agnes was having on the little girl. Lily was retreating again, her shoulders hunching, the light that had started to return to her eyes dimming. The black crayon reappeared with a vengeance. The true nature of Agnes's manipulative grief was revealed one evening during a tense dinner. Julian, trying to keep the peace, was telling a story about a recent business success. Agnes cut him off. "Business? It was always business with you. While you were chasing profits, my daughter was driving in a storm. A storm I told her not to go out in. But she had to get to that charity gala, the one I was chairing. She never wanted to disappoint me." The confession slipped out, a moment of unguarded truth. She had been the one to pressure Clara to drive that night. Her relentless blame of Julian was a shield, a way to deflect her own crushing, unbearable guilt. Julian stared at her, the pieces clicking into place, understanding for the first time the twisted source of her animosity. Knowing her influence was waning, Agnes grew desperate. Her plan was cruel and simple. She had a diamond tennis bracelet, a gift from her late husband, that she always wore. One morning, after a particularly frosty exchange with Alara, Agnes let out a theatrical shriek from her guest room. "My bracelet! It's gone!" She stormed into the living room, her face a mask of manufactured hysteria. "It was on my nightstand, and now it's gone. It's been stolen." Her eyes, cold and accusatory, fixed on Alara. It wasn't here until she arrived. The implication was clear and hideous. Julian immediately defended Alara. "Agnes, that's a ridiculous accusation." "Is it?" she shot back, pulling out her phone. "A priceless family heirloom goes missing, and the only new person in the house is a woman from the streets you inexplicably hired? I'm calling the police." Before Julian could stop her, she had made the call. The next hour was a nightmare. 2 uniformed officers arrived, their presence turning the luxurious penthouse into a crime scene. Alara stood frozen, humiliated, as Agnes tearfully explained the situation, painting Alara as a desperate opportunist. Leo, sensing his mother's distress, clung to her leg, crying silently. Lily had hidden herself behind a large sofa, completely vanished from sight. The officers were polite but firm. "Ma'am, with an accusation like this, we'll have to search your room." Alara felt the blood drain from her face. She knew with a sickening certainty what they would find. Agnes was too clever to just make an accusation. She would have planted it. This was a trap, and it was closing around her. All her hard work, all the trust she had built, was about to be destroyed by one rich woman's lie. Her past had taught her that in a battle of her word against someone like Agnes Thorne, she would never win. Despair, cold and familiar, washed over her. She was going to lose everything. As the officers moved toward Alara's room, she closed her eyes, bracing for the inevitable discovery, the handcuffs, the shame. But Julian stepped in front of them, holding up a hand. "Stop. This has gone far enough." He turned to Agnes, his voice dangerously quiet. "I know what you're doing. I know about your guilt over Clara's death. And I will not let you destroy another good person to appease it." "How dare you?" Agnes gasped. "She is a thief." "No," Julian said, his voice ringing with absolute conviction. He walked over to Alara, standing beside her, a solid, unshakable wall of support. He looked at the police officers, his gaze unwavering. "There has been a mistake. The only person you need to escort from my home is Mrs. Thorne. This woman," he said, his voice softening as he looked at Alara, "is not my maid. She is not a thief. She is the woman I love. And she will soon be my wife." The declaration hung in the air, a stunning, electrifying statement. Alara's eyes flew open, wide with shock and a dawning, brilliant hope. The police officers exchanged an awkward glance. Agnes's face contorted with rage and disbelief. "You would choose this nobody over the memory of my daughter?" "I am honoring Clara's memory by choosing to live again," Julian stated firmly. "By choosing to be happy. By choosing to give her daughter a mother who can heal her, not one who will keep her trapped in the past. Now, get out of my house, Agnes." As Agnes stood sputtering, a movement from behind the sofa caught everyone's attention. Lily emerged, her small face set with a determination that mirrored her father's. She walked past her grandmother without a glance. She walked directly to Alara, took her hand, and squeezed it tight. Then, she turned to face Agnes, her eyes clear and fierce, and she spoke. Her first word in 2 years, a word that was not a word but a verdict, a judgment, a liberation. "Go!" The single syllable echoed in the stunned silence. It was a cannon blast, a tidal wave, a force of nature that swept away all the lies and manipulations. Agnes stared at her granddaughter, her mouth hanging open. The fight went out of her, replaced by a look of utter defeat. She turned, and without another word, she let the security guard escort her out of the penthouse and out of their lives. The moment the door closed, Julian pulled Alara into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "I meant every word," he whispered. Leo ran to them, wrapping his small arms around their legs. And Lily, still holding Alara's hand, leaned her head against her side, a silent, profound gesture of love and acceptance. In the wreckage of Agnes's malicious plot, they had not just survived. They had been forged into a family. Alara wept, not with sorrow or fear, but with the overwhelming relief of being seen, of being believed, of being loved. The silence in the penthouse was finally, truly broken, replaced by the sound of a family coming together. 1 year later, the penthouse was unrecognizable. It was a home. Sunlight streamed through the massive windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The stark white walls were now a warm cream, adorned with framed photographs of a new, blended family. Julian, Alara, Lily, and Leo laughing on a beach, the 4 of them building a snowman in the park. A candid shot of Alara and Julian stealing a kiss in the kitchen. Lily's easel was still in the corner, but now it was covered in bright, cheerful paintings of flowers, rainbows, and smiling stick figures holding hands. The fiddle-leaf fig tree had grown, and a dozen other plants had joined it, turning the once sterile space into a vibrant indoor garden. The sounds were different, too. The oppressive silence was a distant memory, replaced by the constant, happy chatter of children. Lily, it turned out, was a talker. Once she had found her voice, she used it with joyous abandon, narrating her day, asking a million questions, and singing off-key songs she made up on the spot. Her laughter, once a sound Julian had feared he would never hear again, was now the penthouse's most constant and precious music. Alara had blossomed. She was no longer the timid, desperate woman who had stood shivering in the rain. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, her natural warmth and intelligence now given the space to flourish. With Julian's full support and funding, she had started a charitable foundation called the Leo and Lily Project, dedicated to providing emergency housing and job placement services for single mothers facing homelessness. She poured the same empathy and kindness that had healed the Vance family into her work, changing hundreds of lives. She had found her purpose, not just as a mother and a partner, but as a force for good in the world. Julian was a different man. The weary tension had vanished from his face, replaced by a deep, settled contentment. He had delegated more responsibility at Vance Industries, discovering that the world didn't fall apart if he wasn't in the office 16 hours a day. He came home at 5 o'clock every evening, his arrival met with a chorus of "Daddy's home" from 2 excited children. He had learned that true wealth wasn't measured by stock prices or corporate acquisitions, but by bedtime stories and scraped knees and the comfortable silence of sitting next to the woman you love after the kids are asleep. This evening, they were all gathered in the living room. A fire crackled in the modern fireplace, casting a warm glow on the scene. Lily was reading a story aloud to Leo, her voice clear and confident, Leo listening with rapt attention. Alara was curled on the sofa, watching them, a soft smile on her face. Julian sat beside her, his arm around her. He watched his daughter, animated and happy, and his heart swelled with a gratitude so immense it almost hurt. He looked at Alara, the architect of this beautiful new reality, the woman who had walked into his life like a quiet storm and washed away all the grief and shadows. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He shifted, turning to face her fully on the sofa. "Alara," he began, his voice thick with emotion. She turned to him, her eyes questioning. "A year ago, I made a declaration in a moment of crisis. I told 2 police officers and a very angry woman that I was going to marry you." He smiled, a genuine, soul-deep smile. "It was the truest thing I'd ever said, but it wasn't the right way to ask. I want to ask you now, not in a crisis, but in a moment of perfect peace." He opened the box. Inside was a simple, elegant diamond ring that glittered in the firelight. Alara's breath hitched, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes. "You came into our lives and you taught us how to live again," Julian continued, his voice low and earnest. "You taught my daughter that it was safe to speak, and you taught me that it was safe to love. You filled this empty house with warmth and laughter and hope. You are the most honest, kind, and resilient person I have ever known. You saved us, Alara, and all I want to do is spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you and your son deserve. Will you make us a family officially? Will you marry me?" Through her happy tears, she could only nod at first, unable to speak. Then she found her voice. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, of course, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger. A perfect fit. He leaned in and kissed her. A kiss full of love, gratitude, and the promise of 1,000 happy tomorrows. From across the room, their children looked over and cheered. Their joyful applause the perfect soundtrack to the end of one chapter and the beautiful beginning of another. As they held each other, looking out at the glittering city lights that had once seemed so cold and indifferent, they were no longer just a billionaire, a former maid, and their children. They were a family, whole and healed, a testament to the fact that the greatest treasures in life are not the ones you can buy, but the ones you are lucky enough to find in the rain. The story of Alara and Julian is a powerful reminder that our true worth is not defined by our bank accounts, but by the content of our character. In a world that often measures success in dollars and cents, it is the currency of kindness, integrity, and selfless love that holds the most value. It shows that even from the depths of despair, a single act of honesty can ripple outwards, creating waves of change that can heal broken hearts and build new futures. The most profound transformations are often born from the simplest acts of human decency. If this story of hope and redemption touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more soul-stirring tales that celebrate the enduring power of the human spirit.